As a Jehovah's Witness, I was trained to think in terms of us against them, us Jehovah's Witnesses versus the world, everyone else. Everyone not a Jehovah's Witness was classed as worldly. We did not differentiate between religious and non-religious, God-fearing or godless, moral or immoral. They were all worldly. I was taught to protect myself. I needed to keep contact with non-Jehovah's Witnesses to a minimum. Verses like, bad association spoils useful habits, be not part of the world, friendship with the world is enmity with God, these were used regularly to enforce that idea. Now, all parents want to protect their children from evil, from danger, and from recklessness. This counsel did serve me. It did protect me to an extent, and it did me good. But did we, as Jehovah's Witnesses, have the right balance between separation, even isolation, and guidance to train the conscience to be able to live in the world? I don't think we did. Our separation was a rule, often without any knowledge of the people we were deciding not to have any contact with. Everyone that was outside of the Watchtower, we didn't know their character, we didn't know their beliefs. And as witnesses, we didn't give them the benefit of the doubt. We doubted everyone else. We even slandered them without knowledge. So we didn't try and have any kind of connection in the sense of build a friendship with people who were not Jehovah's Witnesses, or try to understand their position or what they believed. If they were outside of the organization, the only contact we might have with them is to present what we believed, not to learn what they believed or how they lived. Or if they were outside the organization, they were of the world. Why were we not considering verses such as Jesus' prayer for his disciples? In John 17, verses 14 to 20, Christ in prayer says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I also send them into the world. And for their sakes I sanctify myself, that they also may be sanctified by truth. I do not pray for these alone, but also for those who will believe in me through their word. So his feeling is that you have to be in the world, and that's how you're going to be a real means of showing what you believe, by being in contact with people. Also, why didn't we consider Paul's counsel in Romans 12:2, where he says not to be fashioned by the world? The way in which one is protected, Christ says, is by his word. And Paul is suggesting don't make your ways their ways, but not indicating just stay away from them, but just not to be fashioned by them. 1 Corinthians 5, I knew verse 9, as a witness, remove the wicked man. But what about the verses right after that? Verse 9, where he says, not to keep company with sexually immoral people. Yet I certainly did not mean with the sexually immoral people of this world, or with the covetous or extortioners or idolaters, since then you would need to go out of the world. But now I have written to you to not keep company with anyone named a brother who is sexually immoral, or covetous, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, not even to eat with such a person. But he's talking about people who are habitually that way and call themselves believers. So this second part of the verse, the verses after, I was not that familiar with. So I read a sermon by Alexander Maclaren, and I wanted to share some of his thoughts on this very subject. In this case, his sermon is about, it's from the Old Testament actually, and it's about Elijah. So the verse that he bases the sermon on, there's two, but I'm only going to do the part about Elijah. 1 Kings 19 verse 9. What dost thou hear, Elijah? God questioning him. So Elijah has fallen into a mood of depression, which so often follows great tension. He had just offered the sacrifice on Carmel and brought all Israel back to the Lord, and Jezebel had flamed out and threatened his life. The usually undaunted prophet was afraid, deserted his work, flung himself into solitude, and shook the dust off his feet against Israel. So the voice came, "What dost thou hear, Elijah? Go back to your work, to Ahab, to Jezebel, to death if need be." This suggestion, this passage seems to him to suggest thoughts as to the Christian duty of separation from the world, and point out the limits as well as the necessity for it. The question to the prophet draws its force from the necessity and duty of God's servant mingling with the world. The parable of the tares and the wheat teaches not so much a lesson in regard to the constitution of the church as in reference to the inseparable intertwining in society, as now constituted of Christians with others. The field is the world, and in it the roots of wheat and tares are matted together, so that the one cannot be pulled up without bringing up the other, whose fibers are interlaced with it. Society in which the kingdom of God in its earthly form is planted is not organized on the basis of religious affinity, but family, kindred, business, and 1,000 other ties knit us together and make separation impossible. God does not mean that good men should club together and leave the bad to rot and stink. Jesus told his disciples that they were the light of the world. And lest that image should suggest that they might ray out their light like a lamp on a high pedestal, while they kept separate or apart, he told them, too, that they were the salt of the earth. And salt has to be in contact with and well rubbed into that which it is to keep sweet. Elijah ran away from his work. The monastic ideal of flying into solitude to look after one's own soul and gathering up one's skirts so as to keep them unspotted from the world crops up in new forms in every age. Whether in the monk with the bare feet and the cowled head and a rope around his brown robe, or in a modern believer who tries to keep himself aloof from the wicked world and cultivate his own religious life, instead of flinging himself into the places where the world's sickness is most pestilential in order to bring healing. We have a repetition of Elijah's fault, which needs Elijah's rebuke. Intermingling is inevitable in the present state of things, and family, kindred, business, social, and political movements all require that Christians should work side by side with men who are not possessors of like precious faith. If ever there had been individuals or communities that have tried to traverse that law, they have developed narrowness and bitterness and stunted growth and 100 evils that we all know. Much of our lives remains over and above the necessary intercourse with the world. The question is, what do we do when we are left to follow the bent of our own deepest affinities? When the weight is taken off the sapling, it springs back to its natural uprightness. Is that like what we do when we are at liberty to obey our heart's promptings? Being let go, they went back to their own company. Where do we go in like circumstances, and what sort of lives do we live in the moments when our own voluntary choice determines our action? We need not lay down special regulations, for they have done more harm than good, but we do need to bring that spirit of separation from the world into our lives. It should influence our selection of associates. A man is known by his company. It says little for the depth of our Christianity if we are more at home with non-Christians because they suit us in certain other respects than those who are one with us in what ought to be the deepest and strongest element in our characters and lives. It should influence our recreations and occupations. We should ask ourselves the two questions concerning these. Can I pray for a blessing on this which I am now doing? Does it help or hinder my communion with God? If we will take these two questions with us as tests of conduct and companionship, it is not likely that we shall go far wrong, either in the choice of our companions or in the choice of our surroundings of any kind, or in the choice of our recreations and our occupations. The main question is, do I grasp the aim of life with clearness and decision, as being to make myself, by God's help, such a character as God has pleasure in? If I do, I shall regulate all these things thereby. We neither recommend our religion nor ourselves to men of the world by inconsistently trying to identify ourselves with them. The world respects an out-and-out Christian, and neither God nor the world respects an inconsistent one. The question to Elijah, "What dost thou hear, Elijah?" God did not ask Elijah the question because he did not know the answer, but because he wished to make Elijah put his mood into words. Since then, Elijah would understand it is a little better, and when he would understand it a little better, and when he found the tremendous difficulty of making a decent excuse, would begin to suspect that the conduct that the conduct that wanted so much explaining was not exactly the conduct fit for a prophet. And so let us think that God is looking down upon us in all our occupation of our free time, that He is wishing us to put into words what we are about and why we are where we are. What would we say if, in some of those moments of unnecessary intermingling with questionable things and doubtful people, we suddenly had to formulate into some kind of plausibility our reason for being there? Better that we should answer the question, "What dost thou here?" than that we should have to fail in answering the future question after we have done with the world. What didst thou there? Let us cleave to Christ, and that will separate us from the world. If we cleave to the world, it will separate us from Christ. Wherever you go, bring Christ, is what I would say. We are set in the world in order to grow like our Master, and their tendency to help to that likeness is the one test of all occupations, recreations, and companionships, by which we may know whether we are in or out of the place that pleases Him. I'm going to link to a video called JWs and Cancel Culture, Major in Guilt by Association, but know nothing of Grace by Association. And the second one, Daniel, was he one of Jehovah's Witnesses? How to be in Babylon but not of it. Thanks for watching.